One of the descriptions given about the holy month of Ramadan is that its beginning is mercy, its middle is forgiveness, and its end is deliverance from the fire. As we approach the middle 10 days of Ramadan, meanings of forgiveness, pardon, and overlooking the wrongs that we do and that others do to us becomes much more necessary. And this can be the case especially with people that have done wrongs that carry on. And this can be especially necessary when we consider wrongs that are merely more than just the type of wrong that we experience in everyday, day-to-day life. There was a person by the name of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and many of us may know him as the one who tortured Sayyidina Bilal in the early days of the Prophet ﷺ calling in Mecca. Umayyah had a son, Safwan, and Safwan, like his father Umayyah, grew up with an intense enmity towards the Muslims and towards the Prophet Muhammad in particular, and had even at one point hatched a plan to assassinate him. When the Prophet ﷺ entered Mecca, in the Fath Makkah, Safwan became scared because he thought that this was going to be a day in which the Messenger of God and the companions will exact revenge. And so, without taking any advice or any cue from anyone, he decided to escape towards the south via the sea, and he made his way slowly and quietly outside of Mecca. Safwan had a friend, his name was Umair ibn Wahab, and Umair had pity over his friend. He had pity over the situation he found himself in. He had pity that his friend had thought that the Prophet ﷺ would exact revenge against Safwan for the wrongs that he had done and the wrongs that his father had did. So Umair went to the Messenger of God ﷺ in Mecca and said to him that Safwan has fled Mecca in fear of his life because he thinks that you and the companions will seek to exact revenge on him. And he said, O Messenger of God, Safwan was a leader amongst his people, someone who enjoyed a special standing and nobility amongst his people. And I urge you to offer him protection so that he may come back. Without hesitation, in a moment, the Messenger of God offered his protection and told Umair that Safwan has my protection to return back to Mecca. Umair was even surprised and had to repeat himself, is he protected? Do you offer your protection to him? Again, the Prophet affirmed that he has his protection. So Umair said, can you give me a sign that I can take to him to demonstrate that you have offered your protection to him? And Allah's Messenger ﷺ removed his turban that he wore as he entered Mecca on that Fath Makkah, and he gave it to Umair and said, this is the sign of my protection for Safwan. So immediately Umair made his way out towards Jeddah, towards the sea, to catch up with his friend and caught him at the shore before he was about to board his boat towards the south. And he urged him and implored him and told him that Safwan, you have now the protection from Allah's Messenger, and this is a sign of his protection, and this is a sign of his truthfulness, or the truthfulness of his protection and what he's offering you. And he gave him the turban. Safwan wasn't convinced. He wasn't sure whether this was a true sign of protection or whether this was just another plan to lure him back into Mecca. But again, Umair implored him and said, the Messenger of God is the most noble, the most righteous, and most honest of people, and he's more honorable than to do this to you, to lure you back into Mecca. So he kept on pleading with his friend until eventually Safwan obliged and agreed to return back to Mecca with him. And so they both returned back to Mecca, and on their return, Safwan went straight to the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and wanted to confirm for himself that he had the protection of the Messenger of God. And so he asked him, Umayr tells me that you offered me protection, and is this true? And the Messenger of God said, Umayr speaks the truth. And so Safwan said, in that case, leave me for 2 months to consider my options. I will take 2 months and I will consider what I do with my life then, whether I stay or whether I go. The Prophet said to him, don't take 2 months, take 4 months. So Safwan accepted. During those 4 months, he lived amongst the companions, amongst the Prophet ﷺ, in and around Mecca. And in that time, he got to mix with the Prophet. He got to see him. He got to see the community of the Muslims. And over that period, his heart eventually relented towards Islam, and he accepted Islam. And he spent the rest of his life thereafter in the service of Allah. Now, for a man who came from the type of legacy that his father had left behind, and from a man who had such enmity towards the Messenger of God, up until that moment in Mecca, the pardon and the forgiveness that the Prophet extended to him, ﷺ, and by extension the companions had extended it to him as well, just shows the transformational nature of forgiveness and pardon when it's true, when it's from the heart, and when it's ultimately done for a reason and a purpose that's much more beyond our own limited and restricted human emotions and restrictions. And so in this holy month, as we enter the middle 10 days of it, and we reflect upon the meanings of forgiveness, we can recall that this forgiveness is not just forgiveness between us and God, and nor is it just between us and our immediate family members, but really between us and anyone directly or indirectly that's directed any type of harm or wrong towards us.